Do not click away, because what I'm about to reveal in the next 60 seconds could be the single most important update you'll hear all year. This isn't financial advice. Always do your own research and never invest more than you can afford to lose. If you hold XRP or follow Ripple's moves, make sure you're subscribed right now. We're decoding the real-time shifts in global liquidity before they hit the headlines. All right, let's get straight to it. Something has shifted under the surface of the global financial system, and hardly anyone is talking about it. XRP is no longer trading like a simple retail token. It's behaving like infrastructure. Overnight, the quiet rails that move money across borders, the same rails central banks and Fortune 500 banks depend on, have started to hum. What you're seeing on the public price chart is just the reflection of a much larger machine turning on behind the curtain. Because while most investors are fixated on headlines and hype cycles, Ripple has been building a second world, a private permissioned mirror of the XRP Ledger used by institutions to simulate real-world settlement flows at scale. Inside those environments, XRP wasn't priced at $2 or even $10. It was stress-tested at valuations in the hundreds of thousands per unit, not because of speculation, but because you can't model trillion-dollar liquidity pipelines using a $1 token. Those were high-value simulations designed to test the system's throughput, latency, and stability under institutional weight. And here's the part that changes everything. Those two worlds, the private and the public, are starting to converge. For years, Ripple has run a dual-ledger strategy. The public XRPL, open and decentralized, where retail and developers build freely, and the private institutional ledger, permissioned, where banks test compliance, scalability, and high-volume liquidity transfer. Until now, they've been separated by regulation, a legal firewall preventing banks from touching the open market. But that wall is cracking. Ripple's engineers are preparing something called permissioned domains, a framework that lets identity-verified institutions plug directly into the public ledger, compliantly. Once that happens, liquidity that's been locked behind closed tests begins to flow through the same rails you and I can see. Think about what that means. Every simulation, every sidechain test, every private ledger stress scenario has been a rehearsal. For this, the switch from testing to activation. And when that switch flips, the market won't react gradually. It'll move like a system that's just gone live. Because XRP was never meant to be a meme coin. It was built to be the settlement layer of the new financial world, the bridge asset that connects fiat, stablecoins, and tokenized assets across jurisdictions in seconds. So as you're watching today's price at around $2.35, understand something. The price you see now is not the price of its potential. It's the shadow of the system still coming online. And the moment those private and public rails merge, when regulated money begins flowing through the same ledger retail traders have held for years, that's the day XRP stops being a chart and becomes a network. A network that could quietly reprice the entire concept of global liquidity overnight. Now that we've established the scale of what's coming, let's talk about how it's happening and why it's all converging faster than anyone expected. For years, Ripple has been running two worlds side by side. The public XRP Ledger, where developers, traders, and retail participants interact freely, and the private institutional ledger, where banks, governments, and payment providers simulate high-value settlement under controlled conditions. These aren't two different technologies. They're two layers of the same design. The public ledger is the proof of concept, open source, transparent, decentralized. The private ledger is the performance layer, restricted, high-speed, and engineered to handle multi-trillion-dollar liquidity flows without latency or risk. Why separate them? Compliance. A regulated entity like Ripple can't use the decentralized exchange, DEX, on the open market because even a single transaction touching a blacklisted address would trigger legal consequences. That's why institutions have been confined to the private domain. But here's where it all changes. Ripple's engineers are now bridging that divide through permissioned domains, identity-verified gateways that allow banks, remittance firms, and liquidity providers to operate directly on the XRP ledger with full legal clarity. This means for the first time, institutional-grade liquidity will move through the same infrastructure as retail traders, just on segregated, compliant rails. Think of it like building a superhighway next to a local road and then quietly removing the barrier in between. Once the gate opens, liquidity from both sides merges. Institutional flows meet public volume. That's the ignition moment, the point where XRP's true market depth becomes visible. And here's where most people overlook something critical. The private ledgers testing XRP at astronomical values weren't predictions. They were stress simulations. If you're modeling global settlement, you can't test $10 trillion in daily flow using a $1 token. You scale the value to match institutional volume and measure performance. Those simulations prove that XRP's infrastructure can handle the velocity and magnitude of global finance, long before any mainstream ETF, stablecoin, or CBDC even touched it. Now that clarity is approaching, and with legislation like the Market Structure Clarity Act defining XRP as a commodity, those institutional systems can finally go live. And when they do, liquidity will no longer be fragmented. It'll be unified. And every corridor that goes active adds demand pressure to XRP's circulating supply. So if you've ever wondered how to position yourself for that kind of move, you already know the answer. Access, liquidity, and timing. That's exactly why I personally use MEXC. It's the exchange where most of the early liquidity waves form first. People constantly ask me, where do you trade XRP or Flare early before the news hits? And that's it. MEXC often lists assets faster than US exchanges, and it gives you exposure to the global pairs institutions use to build liquidity depth. If you haven't set up your account yet, the link is right in the description below. It's where I execute every early stage position before the next leg of volume spikes. Now let's pull back to the macro view. The dual ledger merge isn't a theory anymore. It's an inevitability. Every permissioned domain Ripple launches becomes a new corridor of capital that feeds into XRP's on-chain volume. As these networks connect, banks in Asia, fintech firms in Europe, remittance hubs in Latin America, the structure starts to look less like a payment protocol and more like a living financial organism. One that moves value the same way the internet moves information, instantly, globally, and without borders. That's the design. And the moment those permissioned domains go live, XRP stops being a speculative token and becomes the rail the world settles on. We're now standing at the threshold of something the world has never witnessed before, a total synchronization between regulation, technology, and institutional adoption. For over a decade, Ripple has been constructing the rails of a new financial order quietly, methodically, and unapologetically. And now, with legal clarity within reach, those rails are about to activate in real time. The Market Structure Clarity Act, expected to pass before year-end, will be the switch that turns testing into execution by defining assets like XRP as commodities, not securities. It gives banks, custodians, and payment processors the legal framework they've been waiting for. Because up until now, Ripple couldn't unleash the full system. Every corridor, every connection, every integration had to operate under a veil of legal caution. Once that veil is lifted, the gears can finally move at full speed. When that happens, you'll witness something extraordinary. The private institutional ledgers, the permissioned domains, and the public XRPL will begin merging into one seamless, compliant ecosystem. Think of it as a digital nervous system for global liquidity. Every transaction, every bridge, every tokenized asset firing across the same rails. Central banks testing domestic stablecoins will connect to cross-border corridors. Remittance firms will plug into institutional liquidity hubs. Payment providers will route settlements through on-chain pools. And every one of those connections requires XRP as the lubricant that keeps the system flowing. That's the core distinction most people miss. Institutions aren't coming to speculate. They're coming to use it. Because when you move money at the scale of governments and multinational banks, efficiency isn't a luxury, it's survival. The ability to settle billions within seconds for fractions of a cent is not a marketing pitch. It's an economic revolution. Now, here's where things accelerate. When permissioned domains go live, institutions will begin providing on-chain liquidity services for yield, deploying idle capital into market-making pools, just like they do in Forex or treasuries. That activity creates a positive feedback loop. More liquidity, more volume, more XRP burn, tighter supply, upward price pressure. Every new corridor amplifies that cycle. At scale, it becomes self-sustaining, a global engine of settlement where the value of XRP is determined not by hype, but by throughput. Each transaction, each bridge, each conversion subtly removes XRP from circulation. Multiply that by millions of daily institutional transfers, and you begin to understand why those early stress tests modeled XRP at astronomical prices. They weren't predicting, they were preparing. Meanwhile, macro conditions are aligning perfectly with this rollout. Gold hitting new highs near $4,100 per ounce signals that fiat trust is eroding. The S&P 500 surging $850 billion in a single day shows liquidity rotation is back in full force. And with multiple Federal Reserve rate cuts on the horizon, cheap capital is about to flood back into risk assets. Historically, that's when crypto ignites, and this time it's not just speculation leading the charge, it's utility. Ripple's network now spans 60 licenses across 50 countries. Its stablecoin RLUSD has already broken $500 million in market cap within months, integrating directly into the XRPL and amplifying auto-bridging demand. Every RLUSD transaction increases XRP volume and burns supply, an invisible engine running beneath the headlines. That's what makes this next phase different. We're not talking about a token looking for a purpose. We're talking about a network whose purpose is finally being recognized by the world's largest players. So, what happens next? The answer is simple: liquidity migration. Capital always seeks efficiency, and the XRPL is the most efficient settlement layer ever built. As regulatory walls come down, institutional money will pour into the ecosystem through custodians like BNY Mellon and Fidelity, ETF products, and liquidity pools. That's when XRP transitions from a speculative market to a core financial infrastructure asset. The same way Swift once connected banks with paper messages, Ripple is connecting them with programmable money, and you're watching that transition unfold in real time. Now step back for a second, look at the alignment, the legislation, the partnerships, the technological readiness. Everything that needed to happen is now happening at once. We're entering what I call the harmony phase, the moment when technology, regulation, and liquidity finally sing the same note. And when that harmony locks in, the revaluation of XRP won't be gradual. It'll be instantaneous. So wherever you are watching this from, understand the magnitude of what's unfolding. This isn't the end of a crypto cycle. It's the beginning of the next financial era. A world where money moves as freely as information, where borders disappear, and where XRP isn't just another asset, but the backbone of a new global liquidity system. Because when the switch flips, and it won't announce itself. It will just work. And those who understood it early will already be in position when the rest of the world realizes what just happened. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with another XRP holder. The movement is growing, and every informed investor makes the network stronger. See you on the next one.